3 years after my death, my husband, David, was about to marry his terminally ill high school sweetheart, Emily. He showed up at my mom's house, demanding that I sign divorce papers. My mom told him I was dead. David scoffed, impatient. That's her game, is it? Pulling this stunt now? Emily's dying. I just want to be there for her. How can Hannah be so selfish? He glared at my mom. Tell her if she doesn't show up, I'll cut off your health insurance. He thought he could use me to manipulate Mom. He didn't know she had already stopped treatment, holding on only to see him regret his actions. 3 years. It took David 3 years to remember me. Now a hotshot entrepreneur, he stood on my mom's porch, surveying the empty living room. Get Hannah out here, he barked. Mom, frail and worn, simply said, my daughter is dead. David sneered. Dead? Someone as self-absorbed as Hannah? Please. She's just throwing a tantrum because Emily's sick and I'm spending time with her. He stormed inside, searching every room, but I was nowhere to be found. Hannah's dead, Mom repeated. If you want to find her, go to her grave. David's face hardened. You think this will work? Tell your daughter if she doesn't sign the divorce papers, I'll cancel your health insurance. He tossed the papers onto the table. 3 days. She signs, then we go to the courthouse. If not, his eyes held a chilling coldness I had never seen before. You won't last much longer. He slammed the door, leaving me heartbroken. He was willing to use my mom's life to force a divorce. But Mom's eyes held a strange peace. She watched him go, then pulled a photo of me as a child from a drawer, tracing my face with her frail fingers. Hannah, honey, she whispered. Mom will be with you soon. Obviously, I couldn't sign the divorce papers. A few days later, true to his word, David canceled Mom's insurance. She was elderly, with heart problems, diabetes, high blood pressure, the works. Treatment could have helped, but I knew she hadn't used his money in 3 years. Her illness had advanced too far. She was ready to join me, but she wasn't giving up just yet. She wouldn't let her daughter, who had loved him so completely, be discarded and humiliated. She would wait until David felt the sting of regret. A week passed. Mom made no move. David called, his voice laced with sarcasm. Your daughter's playing hardball, huh? Dragging you into this with her little guilt trip? Even if you die, I won't shed a tear. Tell Hannah to sign the papers. Mom clutched my photo, her fingers digging into her palm. David, I told you. My daughter is dead. David scoffed. Playing hide and seek? I'll find her. A bitter smile touched my lips. Find me? I wish he could. I just hope he won't regret it. Then a weak, coughing voice came through the phone. David, honey, any news about Hannah? Is she angry? Does she want me to die? David's tone softened instantly. Rest, Emily. Don't worry. I'll get that divorce. I'll marry you. Emily's voice was choked with fake sincerity. I know Hannah feels wronged. She probably resents me. I understand. I don't want to steal you from her. I just want you with me before I. Every word painted me as the villain, as if I were the one trying to take him away. And I knew David would never take my side. Emily, don't say that. I love you. Hannah means nothing. I'll find her, even if I have to dig up her bones, and make her sign those papers. He raised his voice deliberately so Mom could hear, then hung up. The dial tone echoed in the silence. I felt Mom's heart break. She stood, wiping away tears. It's okay, honey, she said, a faint smile on her lips. Mom will be with you soon. David used all his connections to find me. It was almost comical. Perhaps this was the most attention he had ever given me. But it was futile. He turned the city upside down, even filed a missing person report, only to be told there was no record of me. Before she died, Mom had transferred my residency back to our small hometown. Officially, I no longer existed in his world. Back in his office, David raged. Idiots! You can't find one person? What do I pay you for? His secretary trembled. Mr. Walker, we've searched everywhere. Ms. Miller isn't in the city anymore. She can't be gone. Her mother's here. Where else would she go? She can't survive without me, without this city. In a fit of fury, David swept everything off his desk. I watched his self-important display, a hollow ache in my chest. He had always seen me as a parasite, someone beneath him, just like he saw my mother. Maybe, check hospitals, his secretary suggested hesitantly. Ms. Miller was in a car accident 3 years ago. There should be records. David paused, confusion flickering in his eyes. An accident? I don't remember that. Before the secretary could elaborate, his phone rang. David, my heart. It hurts. I think it's rejection. Please come. Emily's voice was weak, desperate. David's concern was immediate. He abandoned the search for me without hesitation, rushing to Emily's side. My eyes stung. David and I had shared moments like that once. But now, they belonged to someone else. Maybe they had never belonged to me at all. Because, in truth, Emily's heart was mine. It had been beating in her chest for 3 years, adapting to its new host. There wouldn't be any rejection. She just didn't want him distracted. She didn't want to share his attention. David arrived at the hospital, relief washing over him as he found Emily seemingly fine. Next time, call a doctor, not me, he said, his voice tight with irritation. Emily's face crumpled. David, I was just lonely. I miss you. You've been so preoccupied with Hannah. I don't have much time left. I just wanted to see you. It was a tactic that always worked. Guilt washed over David. I'm sorry, Emily. I shouldn't have left you alone. He squeezed her hand. It's that Hannah. Even now, she's playing games, disappearing. I laughed. A hollow, empty sound. He was right. I was gone. My heart, after all, was already with Emily. It had been for 3 years. Finally, David's secretary found my hospital records. Hannah Miller, age 27, deceased following a car accident. David's hand trembled as he read the report. David's eyes were bloodshot as he flipped through the pages, refusing to accept what he read. This is a lie. A mistake. The hospital screwed up. He ripped the papers to shreds, but the words Hannah Miller, deceased, were seared into his brain. How? Why didn't I know about the accident? He grabbed his secretary's jacket, shaking him. Why didn't anyone tell me? The secretary spoke gently. Ms. Miller was barely alive when she arrived. You were busy arranging blood donations for Ms. Carter. The hospital called repeatedly, but you didn't answer. He hesitated. They said there wasn't enough matching blood. She bled out. Not enough blood? What about the blood bank? David roared. The secretary revealed the brutal truth. Ms. Miller and Ms. Carter had the same rare blood type, O negative. You'd cleared out the entire city's supply for Ms. Carter. There was nothing left for Ms. Miller. David's face went white. He sank to the floor, hands over his ears. No. I didn't know about Hannah. I didn't know. The secretary sighed. Mr. Walker, I'm very sorry for your loss. He reached to help David up, but David suddenly stood, eyes wild. Hannah's mother. She knew. She hid it from me. You're all lying. Hannah's not dead. I'll confront her. This crazed, desperate David was a stranger to me. Even now, faced with the truth, he was deflecting blame. He was truly hopeless. David found my mom in our hometown. In a quiet field, she had built a simple grave for me. She was lighting incense when he arrived. He knocked the incense from her hand, staring at my headstone in disbelief. "What is this? What are you doing?" Mom calmly replaced the broken incense, her voice steady. "Can't you see? I'm paying respects to my dead daughter. Your wife, Hannah." David fell to his knees before my grave. He swept the offerings off the makeshift altar, throwing my photo to the ground. "This is another act. A lie. Hannah can't be dead." Frantically, he dug at the fresh earth, his fingers clawing at the soil until he uncovered my urn. He picked it up, his eyes vacant, his tears finally gone. Mom watched him, her voice filled with grief and anger. "Do you believe it now, David? My daughter was dying in that hospital, bleeding out, and you took every drop of her blood type for your precious Emily. She died on the operating table. You never visited her once while she was alive, and now you desecrate her grave. What did my daughter do to deserve this? To deserve you?" Her words, laced with sorrow and fury, were daggers to his heart. Finally, the weight of my death crushed him. He bowed before my grave, begging for forgiveness. But what good was it now? It was just to ease his own guilt. Mom tossed the divorce papers at him. "David, the dead can't sign papers. My daughter is gone. But consider this our divorce. Do whatever you want. We're done with you. Leave us alone." She turned to leave, but David scrambled after her. "No. Hannah promised, she promised to be with me forever. You can't let her break that promise." His words dragged me back to our wedding day, the warmth of his hand in mine as I vowed to make him the happiest man alive. How hollow those vows sounded now. We were separated by death, and yet he clung to a broken promise. "You gave her nothing, and you demand she keep a promise?" Mom scoffed. "Don't you see how ridiculous you are?" She shook him off and walked away without a backward glance. I watched David kneeling there, and a strange sadness washed over me. He looked so lost. So broken. Just like I had been on that operating table. His secretary approached, holding out a phone. "Mr. Walker, it's Miss Carter." David didn't react, so the secretary answered instead. "Miss Carter? Is there something I can help you with?" "David? My heart, it's hurting again." "Put him on." The secretary hesitated before handing over the phone. "Mr. Walker, Miss Carter says she's in pain. She wants to speak with you." To my surprise, David didn't rush to her side as he always did. He remained motionless. Emily, hearing nothing but silence, became frantic. "David?" The doctor said. "I don't have much time. Are you going to leave me like this?" Finally, David spoke. "Go see Emily," he told his secretary. I need to stay here with Hannah." A wave of sadness washed over me. Why, even in death, did his fleeting moments of kindness still affect me? I had lived on scraps of his love, and even now, they held me captive. This was the first time David had ever refused Emily. I imagined her panic, mirroring my own the day she had returned. I laughed, a hollow, empty sound. We were the same, both living on borrowed love, both devastated by its absence. Emily pleaded with him, begging him to come, but David didn't respond. Finally, the line went dead. His secretary sighed and left. David knelt by my grave, pouring out his grief, guilt, and regret. As if in answer, rain began to fall, soaking the earth. He held my urn close. Some people only learn to cherish what they had after it's gone. My grief for David's belated remorse was cut short by a far greater loss. My mom died. She lay peacefully in her bed, a bottle of pesticide and a note beside her. She had gone quietly, without disturbing anyone. A sharp pain tore through me as I watched helplessly. I saw her drink the poison, saw her body collapse onto the bed. I screamed, trying to reach her, but my hands passed through her. Black blood stained her lips. My mom, my only family, was gone. I was truly alone now, a ghost tethered to a world that no longer held anything for me. Her body lay undiscovered for 3 days until the smell alerted the neighbors. She was still clutching my childhood photo, a faint smile on her face. Why did this keep happening to me? Was this my fate? What was the point of existing like this? Mom had no other family. Her body was taken to the morgue, destined for a pauper's grave. And where was David? At the hospital. With Emily. She was having another rejection episode, a real one this time. He had snapped out of his grief for me and rushed back to his first love. David, you make me feel like such a fool, I thought. But what could I do? He had always loved Emily. The hospital called David's secretary. Legally, I was still his wife, and Mom was still his mother-in-law. They needed him to claim her body. The secretary tried to tell him, but David wouldn't listen. Emily's critical. I can't be disturbed, he snapped, slamming the door. My heart turned to ice. Love, once misplaced, could never truly be retrieved. In the end, it was the secretary who claimed Mom's body, arranging for a simple cremation. He had witnessed the slow disintegration of my marriage. Maybe he pitied me. Maybe he was just the only one with a shred of decency left. Either way, he was the only one who showed my mother kindness in the end. I stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. If there was an afterlife, I hoped I never met David again. The secretary informed David of my mother's death, but he had already reverted to his old indifference. Emily's health consumed him now. He was obsessed with searching for miracle cures, grasping at anything that might keep her alive. He barely acknowledged the news. Hannah's dead. I've grieved. What's the point of this charade, he said, dismissing the secretary with a wave of his hand. Emily needs me. Don't bother me with this nonsense. My hopes, however small, were dashed. Even my death and my mother's suicide hadn't shaken his devotion to Emily. Emily, struggling to sit up in bed, placed a trembling hand on his arm. David, it's okay. Hannah was your wife. Her family. You should go. Her voice was weak, her eyes filled with what looked like sympathy, but I knew better. Her words dripped with false generosity. David took her hand, shaking his head. Emily, don't. I'm not going anywhere. His gaze softened, full of unwavering sincerity, as if reaffirming a sacred vow. I watched their tender exchange, a familiar ache settling in my chest. Why, even now, with my family gone, was I still forced to witness their happiness? To make it worse, David soon announced his engagement to Emily. As the heir to Walker Industries, their wedding became international news. Their faces were plastered across billboards, headlines proclaiming their love for the world to see. A strange sense of peace settled over me. I was dead. What right did I have to anything anymore? If David could move on, if he could find happiness, so be it. Emily held the wedding invitations in trembling hands, a mix of joy and disbelief on her face. David, are you really going to marry me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Yes, Emily. We're getting married. It's not a dream. Soon, we'll be just like any other happy couple. Tears welled in her eyes. David, I've waited so long. I was afraid I wouldn't live to see this day. Just having you here, it's enough. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. They were the perfect picture of love. And I, the outsider, could only offer silent, bitter congratulations. David, Emily. Be happy. Their wedding was extravagant, a spectacle of wealth and romance. The media called it the ultimate love story, a testament to David's devotion. No one mentioned me. No one remembered the forgotten wife who had died 3 years earlier. I watched as guests showered them with blessings, their faces glowing with happiness. David and Emily stood together, the perfect couple, lost in their own world. A familiar pang of sadness hit me, but I knew it was over. He was no longer mine. Who would want a wife who was nothing but a ghost of the past? The ceremony began. David held a bouquet, facing Emily, her eyes shining with love. The officiant smiled warmly. Emily Carter, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, till death do you part? I do, she said, her voice ringing with joy. As the officiant turned to David, the lights went out. Gasps echoed through the hall as the massive screens flickered to life. A grainy hospital recording played. A doctor's voice, cold and clinical, filled the room. Ms. Miller, there's no more of your blood type available. You're going to die. A shudder ran through me. I hadn't seen this before. The screen showed me, barely conscious, lying in a hospital bed. My lips were pale, my body weak. Instead of dying needlessly, why not donate your heart to Ms. Carter, the doctor continued. It would save her life and, well, it would be a gift to Mr. Walker. A murmur swept through the wedding hall. I watched, horrified, as a nurse guided my trembling hand to sign a form. The moment the ink touched the paper, my fore was removed. I struggled, my lips parting as if to protest, but my body was too weak. The next moment, the doctors cut me open. While I was still alive. The screen went black. Silence. Then, chaos erupted. David stood frozen, his face ashen, his entire body trembling. Slowly, he turned to Emily. 3 years ago, he said, his voice eerily calm, your doctor told me you needed massive transfusions. That your blood type was rare. That I had to clear out the city's entire supply. His gaze bore into her, dark and unrelenting. What a coincidence that Hannah had an accident that same day. He took a step closer. Emily shrank back. What a coincidence that she died from blood loss. David, no, it wasn't like that, she stammered, her face drained of color. It was an accident. The more she explained, the less he believed her. She stepped backward, stumbling, her heel catching the edge of the stage. With a scream, she fell. Gasps filled the hall as Emily hit the ground, blood pooling from her legs. David didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't care. Did you tell your doctor to say that? His voice was a whisper of rage. Emily coughed, struggling to sit up, her hands trembling. No. It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. David ignored her. He grabbed her collar, yanking her close. Tell me the truth. She choked on a sob, gasping for air. I didn't. He shoved her back down. Then, without another glance, he turned to the stunned crowd. His expression was unreadable. I'm sorry, he said coldly. The wedding is off. He looked down at Emily, who lay there, shaking. I will never marry this woman.